I'm uniquely different than most people that leave corporate. I was behind the curtain on Footprints for 3 years before I bought mine. Um, the moment I wrote the check, I had this feeling of what the heck did I just do?
Hello and welcome to the Tracer Franchising Podcast. This is a podcast where usually we interview great franchisees and franchisors. Today, I'm kind of doing both, and I'm kind of doing something different. So I've got Brian Knuth, who's a franchisee, and he's the head of development at Footprints Floors. So he's also a franchisor. But really, what we're here to talk about is fear. It's something that everybody feels in the franchise discovery process. And it's something that most people actually can't get over, right? They've been thinking about owning a business sometimes for their entire life, and they just can't get past the fear. And so we're going to talk about how Brian's done it. We're going to talk about how science says you can do it. And we're going to talk a little bit philosophically how the Stoics advise us for getting through fear. But I'm going to start up with a little bit of an analogy, right? I think starting a business is like surfing, right? And it's not just because I love surfing and I love business. I think it looks cool to run a business, and people like to watch, and but they're too scared to try, right? Most people are like, man, that looks awesome, but I would never do that. It's way harder than it looks, right? So hopefully we'll get into a little bit more of the nitty gritty details today. So with that, Brian, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us about you, and then let's get into your journey of owning businesses.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm chuckling because as you said that analogy, I haven't thought about it much in this light. But years ago, I climbed trees for a living, and I did that out of necessity. Right? I took an opportunity with my in-laws to work for them. They owned a tree removal business, and I found that if I could come up with that skill set of getting in the trees, I could make more money because I was a better asset to them. And so, as you were talking about that, I'm like, you know what? How did I overcome it? I learned knots. I learned how to trust my rope. And so, yeah, as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking, man, how did I ever get to the top of the tree and successfully prune it or remove it on the way down? I trusted my ropes. So, yeah, started a franchise development firm in 2012 with some partners. The firm was called Braintree, and we represented multiple franchise organizations and helped them with all things recruitment, right? So, helping with lead generation, marketing, and just educating prospective franchise owners about the opportunities of our businesses, whether it be a children's swim school or a brewery or a doggy daycare or Footprints Floors, right? Footprints Floors is a brand we acquired as partners, I should say, and became their sales agency in 2018. And I put my hand up and said, I have a lot of similarities with this and the previous tree removal business I was a part of. And so I started representing that brand directly. And I became an owner of that brand in 2020. So I bought some territories of myself or for myself rather, and I operate those with a team as a franchisee. And yes, to your point, Josh, I still maintain the title of, I guess I'd be the director of franchise development for Footprints Floors, along with a franchise owner, a multi-unit franchise owner of Footprints Floors. And in the same breath or same vein of fear, I'm also a husband. I'm a father of twin boys. And I think a lot of those things correlate and they all tie in. And, I'm sure we're going to weave that in, but that's a little bit about myself. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a business owner, I'm an employee, I'm a whole ball of wax.
It's all sorts of things. So yeah,
That's right.
let's just start with, you had a job, it wasn't going anywhere, you had these skills, um, and you went to start something that was totally new with some partners.
Mhm.
So how did you kind of get past, well, first talk about like, what were you, was there fear, or was it just like an obvious move? Um, yeah.
At the time I was young, I don't think I was as, um, I don't know. Maybe I was ambitious. Maybe I was young. Maybe I was full of piss and vinegar, as they say. And so, no, it wasn't a fearful move. I looked at a tremendous amount of opportunity in front of me. I also looked at kind of necessity behind me, which I think that's an important story and something I see come up as candidates evaluate a business. I think oftentimes in life we're motivated by a couple things. We're either motivated by negative motivators or by positive motivators. The positive is I like vacations. I want to have, more vacation and make more money. The negative is like, man, my boss is killing me, or the industry I'm involved with is suffering reform and regulation, and they're going to lay people off, and or whatever. And I was probably more running from something at that time versus to something, and so it was almost necessity, which didn't give me the opportunity to have too much fear. I had to simply believe in what I was running to, which was I could successfully equal or create something equal to what I already had. And then I had to figure out how to make more. So at the time, I was really motivated by a negative motivator, which was I needed to figure out something else to do. Um, and franchise development and starting this franchise development firm was something I was willing to put my hand on and say, let's do it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good right. I think there's a famous quote that says, "With the right why, you can withstand any what." Um, and so, with the right motivators, people are gonna figure out a way to do this. Um, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think fear comes up mostly with people who would be okay if they didn't start a business. They really want to, but, like, their life's not gonna end if they don't start a business. Um, and so maybe that's where you were later on, right? When you were working as the director of the franchise development for Footprints Floors, um, and you looked at it and said, "Hey, maybe I should own some of these territories." You didn't have to. There's nothing pushing you to do that.
Hmm.
So kinda what was that a different feeling, that time around when you started that business?
Yeah, great point. Completely different feeling because I was looking at and evaluating an opportunity to take on some risk, improve the lifestyle for my family, but it wasn't necessary. And it was, not necessarily a want, but it was a desire, if you will. So, absolutely, totally different landscape of fear. Um, and I was in a uniquely different spot as I looked at the purchase of Footprints Floors. While it's not an overly expensive franchise, all things compared, um, it was substantially more than sweat equity. So starting the franchise sales firm with my partners was was a financial commitment, if you will, but it was sweat equity. It was grinding, getting to work, a laptop, a phone line, and hustle, grit, perseverance. It was my time, which I had. Um, Starting the franchise was going to be investing into a team, buying and paying for a franchise fee, buying and paying for substantial marketing. And so it was a uniquely different situation where I was going to pledge to build a team because I did have responsibilities attached to running and managing the franchise development firm with my partners. And so I wasn't able to do this with my own time. And in having the means to purchase the franchise, that didn't come overnight. So I think one of the things I was hung up on was I was extremely diligent and disciplined with spending. I've always had pretty good mentors in my parents, and I owe them a lot of respect for teaching me money management and so forth. And it was great because I had a nest egg to buy this business. But one of the biggest fears I had was breaking my spending patterns, which my spending patterns were you don't spend money. I had things I needed, mortgage and things like that. But to invest and start a franchise went against the grain. And so there was a significant amount of fear attached to challenging myself to do something that I had never done before, which is come out of your pocket, write the check, sign the franchise agreement. So, yeah, totally different landscape of fear as I approached buying the Footprints business.
Awesome. And so now you have a family, you have, a hard-earned savings account. Um, you're looking at territories that are not where you live, right? That adds more risk, I think, right? A lot
Mhm.
more risk, actually. Um, and so, like, what are all the 'cause it's never just one thing, right? It's like a accumulation of all the things, right? So, like, what are all the different if you just lay them on the table, the things that you were concerned about, you're worried about?
Um, I think the biggest one was my ego bigger than my talent. Um, and let me back you up a moment. By this point, this is like 2019, let's call it. I had been helping award franchises for 7 years. I had helped gosh, I don't know, a couple hundred franchise owners get involved in their respective businesses, from, like I say, children's art studio to, mobile screen business, you name it. Um, and so I had a lot of experience in helping people speak about different things as it relates to, you know, going from being a seasoned school teacher or engineer or whatever to owning said franchise. And so by the time, Footprints Floors was something that was on my radar to invest in, I had a tremendous amount of logic and a tremendous amount of like evaluation techniques under my belt. I'd helped multiple people. I'd watched them get involved and make their decision, and then from there carry on with training and start up and then grow their teams and become successful. I'd also watched people not do as well, and some of them fail for a variety of reasons. It's lack of effort, it's undercapitalization is probably one of the biggest things. And so, as I went into this, I think one of the biggest things I was thinking was, um, is this driven by ego? Because I thought to me, it seemed very doable. It was being replicated across the country by other franchise owners. And I thought, man, I'm not a brilliant guy, but they're not smarter than me. They're no more capable than me. And, they didn't have noticeably bigger budgets than I have. Um, but as I kind of approached all that, that would have been probably my biggest fear. But then the budget one too was another one, because I think, to your observation, is I launched this 4 or 5 states away. I guess I live in Denver. I launched it in Indianapolis, and so I needed to evaluate an individual to operate it, and I needed to invest in that individual. So as I thought about budgets, um, those budgets kind of were unknown as well, because I had to figure out if this individual I was going to gamble on wasn't going to cut it, I might have to start over. And it wasn't a sweat equity play anymore. And so, it's probably two things: was I was fearful of my ego, and I was fearful of, the budget conversation.
Mhm. Okay. So I think that's a big one that, I can see it because so I own Tippy Toes Dance, people who are listening. Um, and one of the biggest things that stood out to me, because my wife was gonna run it day to day. She was gonna leave her job and she was gonna run it day to day. She was a pediatric nurse, so not a no P&L responsibility. She's not doing marketing. She's not doing sales. She was obviously a smart person. She's very personable, as most nurses have to be. And so we get on and we start calling franchisees. We spoke to probably a dozen or more franchisees, and these are just like normal people, um, with normal jobs and no special skills beyond they were, nice. They weren't dancers. And I think that was something that like really helped her um get over that fear of like exactly what you're saying. She's like, I think I can be, but what if I'm wrong? What if I'm not this business owner? And I think talking to that many people who had no business experience before really, really helped her. So it's interesting you bring that up, right? Um, and then the second one, I think, where you talk about the money is, I think a lot of people who have the capital to invest in a franchise have to be good with money, and they have to think about it in a way somewhat similar to how you're thinking about it, right? So I don't know if you wanna, like, kind of expound on that, because and see, like, the patterns that you've seen over these years of helping people start up, like, the common patterns when it comes around the fears of investing.
For sure. One of the things I see in a lot of those, you know, entrepreneurs who made the decision, took the leap of faith, that helped me was, there's a fear of spending the money, because traditionally, like you said, a lot of the folks we work with in franchise are corporate refugees. And a lot of our family members are in corporate America, and this traditional retirement plan of, if you stick, it used to be if you stuck with a company, you got a pension. Well, those days are long and, long gone. But 401ks and company sponsored retirement programs, people believe that they're going to keep saving, keep saving, keep saving. And one day, when the savings is big enough and their time in the industry is such, and hopefully their debt service, their mortgage, their cars is all bought down to a point, they can now afford to go from making money and saving to not making money, and living off the saving, living off the nest egg. Well, one of the things I've seen with a lot of successful entrepreneurs is, entrepreneurship is uniquely different to that plan. That plan takes discipline. That plan takes a long time and longevity, and so does entrepreneurship. But one of the goals in entrepreneurship that I see a lot of folks focus on is building a business that has an equitable resale. It's building something beyond Josh or beyond Brian. It's that adage of, if you get hit by a bus, can the business continue to operate without you? And if you're pursuing, in my experience, if you're pursuing a business that you can sell with equity, that's going to, open up buyers that want to buy your business and for a premium, chances are you've shown that that business can operate in your absence. And if you take that, and I'm really jumping fast forward here, but if you take that comment and say the business can run without me, what does that traditional retirement switch look like? Well, gosh, if you're now whatever age and the business can run without you, um, you're no longer asking yourself to save a nest egg and then live off that until one day you're no longer living. You've created a revenue stream by investing in yourself and a team and a system and building that team to now you flip the switch, and now you've got freedom and time, and you don't have to worry about that nest egg going away, or you outliving what you saved in a traditional IRA or 401k or whatever. And so, I guess back to your question, like, what are some of the things that I've seen people have to think about is, logically, do you have the logic? Are you rooted, and is the business you're looking at, does it have the potential to grow to that scalable, you know business, if you will? All too often, I think you get these people that buy a job, and that can offer kind of the same path as retirement. So then you kind of sit back and you run the math and wonder, is keeping my job and saving into a traditional 401k and hoping that the market gains, and one day 62 and a half or whatever the number is, probably 72 now, um, can I retire and live off that chunk of money I created, or can I invest in this franchise of some sort, build a team, build a revenue model and a cash flow model to where one day I can start to hire myself out of certain positions, or another way to say it, I start to fire myself from certain things. And now, lo and behold, maybe I am working on my business 5 to 10 hours a week, and I'm drawing a pretty nice salary that carries me off into retirement, quote unquote. So I think a lot of the decisions for a lot of folks is probably anchored to that big vision at the end, which is, it's way out there, but you have to think about what is the future going to look like for me. And I think a lot of the fear is overcome by the opportunity, but that opportunity is not what's going to happen tomorrow. That opportunity is what's going to happen 7, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Maybe not with the same concept. I see a lot of entrepreneurs, they start one concept, then they go to the next one, then they go to the next one, and they've got 2 or 3 or 4 things going. And those are some of the, I don't want to call them richest or wealthiest, but those are some of the people that I've been able to look at and see and admire, that they really get to control their time. I think time is probably the biggest currency that we're all looking to buy, and it usually takes money to do so. But so, short answer to your question, it took me a long way to get there, is I think the big picture goal and opportunity that people really set sail to build is what helps them overcome some of that fear.
Yeah. Okay. And so there's a couple things I want to kind of go back and highlight here. Um, so start off with, who is the person that's starting this franchise? And like you said, it's usually someone who's been tight with savings their entire life, and they have something that they can invest. Starting a business um isn't 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 nothing. Most franchises, you need at least 50 to $100,000 in liquid capital, right? And then you're taking on some sort of SBA debt that you're signing on a personal guarantee for. And so, the person who has saved $100,000 isn't the person who's used to cutting big checks all the time, right? So this is a very rare thing that happens in their life, and it's normal to be afraid of things that don't happen very often, right? You haven't built the muscle
Hmm.
memory to do it. And so I think just like knowing that it's a normal feeling, right? That it's not going to feel natural, right? Because people are like, oh, well, this just doesn't feel natural. Like, so my gut's telling me not to do it. So yeah, no kidding, dude. This is the biggest investment you've ever made. It might be bigger than the down payment you put on your house if you had like an FHA loan or something, right? Like, yeah, no kidding, it's telling you not to do it, right? So you said you have to
Hmm.
look at the logic, right? And so I think you laid out two pretty distinct options. Um, and that sometimes people don't know what they're gonna take, which option they're gonna go with, right? And I think that's another thing is like in corporate America, well, I'm gonna be manager, and then I'm gonna be senior manager, then I'm gonna be VP, then I'm gonna be executive VP, and I'm gonna be, whatever. And then I'm gonna retire and I'm gonna have, $1 million vested in that 20 years. I'm gonna have $1 million saved and the market's gonna go up and I'm gonna have $5 million that I can write off into the sunset with. With this, it's like the future's like unfolding as you take a step and then like the next step unfolds. Like you don't know what's happening two steps from now, right? Um, in most businesses, I will say. What's nice about franchising is if there's 100 people or 200 people and they've been around for 10 years, we kind of know what it's going to look like. Like if I do the
Hmm.
same things as this guy, in 10 years, I'm going to have the same results as this guy. So that is kind of nice. Um, there's obviously like a little, you're not that person, so it's not going to be exactly like that, but you'll have an idea, right? Um, but anyway, going back to the two things that you said is like long-term growth and exit, and then kind of buying a job and saving the same way you would in America. And I don't think either one's wrong necessarily.
Hmm.
I think there's just what does a person want? Because if you're looking for a big exit, like you are grinding for a very long time, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm gonna grind for 20 years in corporate America, or I can go grind for 20 years in a business, like you're probably gonna have a better outcome in a business because every growth takes work, right? So it's not like I'm gonna get to $500,000, put in a manager, and in 10 years he's gonna get me to 2 million. No, the manager's probably gonna keep things to where it is, maybe a little bit better, right? Like you will still be, even if you're on the business, you'll still be working very, very hard to double it and double it again and double it again to get to that $5 million outcome, right? Now of course your cash flow that whole time is also getting bigger, which is nice. Um, but it's a lot of work. Um, or what people do, and I see this a lot in franchising, and maybe it's because I'm around it more, but it's like they get to that $200,000, $300,000 profit. They hire a guy for 80 grand, and then they're like, "I'm good." And they don't really do much. They work that
Hmm.
20 hours a week. They make sure he's doing what he's
Yeah.
supposed to be doing. And they're like, "I don't want to grind for another 20 years. I want to make 200 grand until I die." And I'm gonna raise my prices with inflation, and so I'm gonna have the same income, inflation adjusted forever. Um, and I see that too. And I don't think one's wrong. I think it's your personal thing, and a person I think a lot of times go in thinking they're gonna do the first thing, and then they see what their life's like, and they're like, I'm done grinding. After 5 years or whatever it is, like, I'm not doing this anymore. Um, anyway, so I've said a lot. What are your thoughts there? Where am I wrong? What can you add to?
Yeah, man, there's so much to unpack as you were talking there. I think you bring up a very valuable point in regards to people reaching a spot that they can then insert whatever infrastructure, whatever team members, and they can start to control their lifestyle. And that's what I said earlier about like time tends to be one of the most sought after currencies that people go after. And, I've helped a lot of franchise organizations grow. And one of the steps in franchise discovery is called validation or peer review. And you speak to, as a candidate would get informed about a business, they would start to speak to existing franchise operators. And the goal in that exercise is to understand, what were those franchise operators' pitfalls? What were their strengths as they entered into the business that helped them? What were some of the things they had to revisit and relearn? And how long did it take them to get to a point of, cash flow and profitability and all that stuff? And it's hard to get folks that are leaving or maybe in corporate America or just left corporate America who had a salary, 200 grand, let's just say, sizable income, to then look at and evaluate a business without going straight to what do you make? And so they sometimes fail to ask questions about, whoa, 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 what was your goal? What was your need to make? Where are you at in your life cycle with your family and your kids? Like I said earlier, I've got twin boys that are 11. My joke right now is I hope I will always be a father first, but my time is more valuable than money, right? I'm in a very fortunate spot. Entrepreneurship got me there, but I jokingly say in 4 years when my kids are 15 and want nothing to do with me, I'll be a workaholic again. But right now, I'm on the ice coaching hockey, 6 days a week with them. And, today's a Monday. People don't know we're doing this on a Monday. This is my only call today. I've been playing with my kids and so forth. And so as folks evaluate the the fearful decision of exiting corporate America at a $200,000 salary, and they speak to a guy named Bill that owns this business, and Bill, gosh, Brian, I only heard he makes 115 grand a year. It's like, yeah, but did you ask Bill where he needs to be and so forth? So there's so many things to unpack related to like earnings potentials inside of businesses, and what oftentimes W2 employees want to compare a salary to what we oftentimes try to get them to think about is what's an owner discretionary income look like? What are the owner discretionary benefits attached to this business? So I think going back to your overview of like what do people look at um, as they're doing this, it's like they oftentimes get stuck on just what can I make versus what does the opportunity look like. So I think that's a very important exercise to go through. Another thing that you brought up was these layers of growing businesses, whether that be a private business or whether that be a franchise business. And I look at that and I think you're not wrong. Whatever next step you take, while certain things are now not on your plate anymore because you're not, ringing the register. I've hired someone to ring the register. Now I'm going to go to the back office and start to look at and scrutinize my marketing budgets. And so you just take these different steps. Well, in private business, man, what the heck are you doing when you go back to that office to look at marketing budgets? Unless, of course, you're a marketing person, you might be in a task or involved in a task that you really don't have a whole lot of expertise in. And so while you might be able to come up with some chat GPT, guidance on what to do, you're then going to take your money and throw it at marketing and say, I sure hope that works because chat GPT said this is the next marketing program for a sandwich shop or whatever the case may be. In franchising, as you grow to those next levels, usually you're surrounded by some pure franchisees that are maybe in the moment of doing and pursuing the growth path you're on, or they've already done it. They've blazed a trail. Heck, you're hiring your first manager. They've got 3 of them on their team. So they can help you with comp structures. They can help you with, here's some of the skill sets we're looking for that we found success in that manager position. May seem counterintuitive. So in business, and I think careers, as we take on those next risks, which reward us with higher incomes, um, there's oftentimes this new gap of, gosh, I don't know what I don't know. In franchise, oftentimes you're met with peers that can help you. They've been there before. There's a shared resource network. So I think, going back to how do I grow from a college education to a, I don't know, I'm an intern to I'm a hired position to I'm a director, I'm a VP, I'm a whatever. You climb that scale because you're educated in that category and you've been leaning in on the resources and you're loyal. In franchise, you can have that same type of growth path. There's a structure there, so it can help somewhat mitigate the risk as you evaluate what's the next rung on the ladder. How do I get there? Has someone else done it? Let me talk to them. Let me emulate or replicate what they've done. So I think there's a lot of value in that, but you have to be open. You have to be open to talk to those people, tap into those resources. And there's a lot that comes from that I see as I speak to folks, because a lot of times what we're also comparing against, and I share this with folks related to Footprints Floors, but this holds true with just about any franchise, I think, is whatever career you're potentially leaving that affords you the opportunity to buy this business, you're making good money. Go back to that $200,000 salary. You're a professional engineer. You're a professional, insert your title. You're good at what you do. You've been doing it for 16, 18, 22 years. Right? You're really good at it. You're going to wake up tomorrow and be a crappy flooring business owner. Sorry. You're brand new. You're like a brand new born deer on ice, like you can't even walk. But be patient. So as you approach all this, and this isn't really an answer to anything, but maybe just a visual for people to think about as fear comes in and you're going, gosh, I know enough about this. I've done my due diligence and I've looked at this business for however long. Why am I feeling this feeling? Because in the back of your mind, you're going to wake up tomorrow and you're going to suck at what you do. And it's going to take you time to get good at it. And I share that with you. Like, my journey as I helped award several franchises with footprints and other organizations prior to that, I was very, very, very confident in the working model of Footprints Force. I was extremely aware of everything we did from a support system, and I was very aware of what the franchisor couldn't offer. So there was no gap in my knowledge base about the business and the opportunity. Again, a little of my fear was ego because I was thinking, man, do I know so much about this that I'm oversimplifying it? But one of the things I still had to tell myself was, we're still going to wake up and be a crappy flooring company tomorrow. And so as I got the confidence and I helped award, you know, I think I was the 10th franchisee in the system. So I helped award, 9 folks before me, and I was watching a consistent development. If they did X, Y, and Z, the result was this. And I was very confident in all that. I got to this point of signing my franchise agreement and writing the check. And I say this to you because I'm uniquely different than most people that leave corporate. I was behind the curtain on Footprints for 3 years before I bought mine. Um, the moment I wrote the check, I had this feeling of, what the heck did I just do? And mind you, I was like beyond confident in the team. I knew these people. Like, I live right next to the founder and owner, Brian Park, and that was December of 2019. We came out and trained at the end of January of 2020. I was still going, what the heck did we do? Although I was like, yeah, all right, we're absorbing it. It's all good. We turned on marketing budgets February 3rd. And if you can remember 2020, March 10th, we were feeling like we were getting going. We were meeting with customers. We were giving estimates. There was a shelter in place order. We fell on our face. Now, that was something that was a little bit hard to deal with, but something that, because it was out of our control, I wasn't real fearful, but I still had the fear of, is this business ever going to grow legs? And are we going to have the capabilities to run it? And it wasn't until about May that we're in action. We were deemed essential, which was awesome. We were going out, we had pivoted, we were given some virtual estimates, although that doesn't really matter on this call. But by about April, homeowners were willing to hire us and bring us into their property to transform their floors. And by about May, I finally was able to go, okay, we got this. And the we got this wasn't we were making great money, but it was the things that we can control inside the business will make a big difference in our customer acquisition. So we can control showing up. We can control articulating a message to customers. We can earn their business by being loyal, honest individuals. And so all of a sudden, footprints and flooring technical stuff aside, we were starting to visualize the fact that us humans in this business could capture other humans to give us checks and their money, and then we could fulfill the work that they gave us a check for. And so that exchange was like, okay, now we're well underway. Now it's time to push on the gas pedal and figure out how to get better at certain stuff. But yeah, that's a little bit of my journey. I was like, oh boy, what did I just do?
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
fear didn't go away for a while. So it's not you go through an evaluation, you get to a confidence level where you believe you could be successful at that business. You say, okay, that's it. Everything else, like all those feelings are gone. No way. Those feelings don't go away.
Yeah. Yep. It's so funny. I'm laughing because like we bought Tippy Toes and the exact same thing, right? Exact same thing. And my wife's, because I've worked for the people who sold Tippy Toes, franchise Fastlane. I uh, I'm a franchise broker, so I'm supposed to know about franchises. And I'm like, oh my God, like, was this? And then we moved from Little Rock to Denver specifically to start this franchise. So we're like moving our whole life. And obviously, my wife's like looking at me. And I'm like, oh, yeah, for sure. Great idea. In my head, I'm like, oh my God, like, what are we doing?
Mhm.
And we had that moment. It was, it's just a couple weeks in where it was like, okay, this works, and it's like this huge sigh of relief where like people are buying things. They like your product. You're like, okay, this isn't a huge scam. You always
Right.
have this in the
Right.
back of your mind that like, did I just get like conned by somebody? Because of how much
Mhm.
money we put up, right? And then but then it keeps happening. They're like, hire a manager. And you're like, I don't have that much stuff going on. And they're like, the franchise says to hire a manager. So you hire a manager and like you see payroll and you're like, what am I doing? And then all of a sudden you have all this time to go do other stuff and the business starts expanding and you're like, oh, okay. that was a good idea, you know? And then they're
Hmm.
like, hire a salesperson. You're like, okay. And so like you're paying them as you're training them, and then they start closing deals. And you're like, oh, okay, that was a good idea, you know? So it's like every investment, you're just like, it's a little easier to make the decision, right? Because you're like, okay, these franchisors know what they're talking about, so I should just do what they say.
Yeah.
But it's still scary every time. Um,
Well, and I would share, like, I go back to, I said earlier, the ropes, trust your ropes.
yeah,
Um, I'm an analytical guy by nature. It's the way I was brought up. I like math. I tend to find that math has rules behind it that they're just not up for debate. We could talk about pronouncing a word. We could talk about, how did a war, what were the motivators of a war? It's all opinion. And so, as I evaluate different businesses and I help folks, I tend to take an analytical approach. I tend to take this approach of, like, what's the current situation? What's the risk of the new situation? What's the cost of capital? What are the interest rates? What's all these different things. And so as I evaluated footprints, and I'm sure you too, tippy toes, one of the things we start to get confident in is a core structure. It's not a guessing game. There are KPIs, or key performance indicators, to the different aspects around the business that say you're in control or you're out of control. And so as you start to go through this process of evaluating, for me, my decision to move forward with Footprints Floors was largely because this business was rooted to math. There's a cost to get into a customer's property. There's an ideal number that you're to get out of a customer, and a ratio. If you earn a customer's project, you should have X amount of labor costs attached to it, and then there should be a certain profit number. And so as you start to look at that, you can take that and you can extract how many people it takes to do a certain volume of revenue, and there's just math behind it. I can understand how many hours are in a day for our operation, and that's not by our choice. Customers don't want you there at 10 o'clock at night. It just doesn't work. So you start to recognize, what is the math of this opportunity. Oh, tippy toes, I know you guys go to different facilities and daycares and you provide dance instruction. Well, gosh, daycares aren't open at 4 a.m. and they're definitely not open at 9 a.m. So we could start to figure out what's the window of operations. And so as you think about hiring your next person, you go back to, what are you anchored to? What do if I'm anchored in the tree to my ropes, I'm anchored in my business to the math. And as I hire somebody, because the franchisor says, hey, here's our experience, I can start to evaluate not only, okay, yes, I am in need of this individual because I'm running out of daylight and I'm an army of one. So as I hire this next person, they're going to help me because now we're an army of two. But furthermore, now I have manageable expectations for that hire. Because as we hire a human, we take a leap of faith on somebody that we might not get along with personally. We hope we do. That's the goal. We hope we have a great culture and we're aligned and we're all having fun. But at the end of the day, this is a business transaction where, if I don't like you, I might be scrutinizing things because we just don't get along. We listen to different music or something like that. If I'm rooted to the KPIs, I can separate my personal opinions on that employee, and I can say, as long as they're hitting and managing the KPIs that are deemed, the expectation in this role, um, we don't necessarily have to be friends. Now, that's not ideal, but the picture I'm trying to paint here is I go back to being rooted in the logic, rooted in the math. And as you scale, you can revert to that and say, because every day is tricky. Like I tell folks, in our flooring business, the hardest thing we deal with is emotions. Homeowners, their house is torn apart, crews, they got a flat tire or whatever. Those things are always going to get in your way in business. People get yelled at, they get flat tires, they get a speeding ticket from a police officer on their way to pick up their kid from tippy toes. And, it's like, you weren't mean to their kid. They just had a bad day. So these emotional engagements can sometimes, they can, they can affect us as business owners. But when we're rooted to, like, the math of our business, the logic of our business, the KPIs, we can drive higher success. And oftentimes I find that franchise organizations, they have these models in place. We don't have to guess at them and try to figure out, like, what's a fair amount of lessons that an instructor can give in a day. Tippy Toes is like, no, 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 guys, that gal, you probably need another dance instructor. Like, that person is grinding, and you're like, really? Okay, because ultimately, like you said, your wife is not dancing. She's not doing instructions. So when she is scrutinizing an employee, and corporate's like, hey, you're getting good miles out of that employee, your wife can go, oh, I am, or so forth. This is me of just highlighting the franchisors tend to have good structures in place that help you kind of stay rooted to that so the emotions don't disrupt you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. So very cool. So talking about science, I'm gonna move into the kind of the science here piece. Is this soft science? It's not math. Sorry, Brian. Of basically how are we supposed to deal with fears? Right? These are some therapies that have been proven to work, right? And so the first thing they say, no matter what you're gonna use, is you've got to identify what's triggering the fear. And I think in franchising, it's not obvious, right? It's like, oh well, I'm gonna buy this business. So it could be financial ruin, right? But hopefully you've done the math and you're not scraping by, right? You don't want to use your last dollar to invest in a business, right? Because things go wrong. So maybe it's not that. Maybe you're worried that you're going to look dumb, right? That if you made a bad decision or you end up, 5 years from now making less than you're now, and you have to tell your family or your friends that, oh yeah, I'm doing okay. Like that. Some people that's very damaging. Or I'm doing flooring and I left McKinsey. Like that could be the fear that your friends are gonna laugh at you. Um, you'd be afraid that you're letting your family down. Like you want to be this guy that supports your family, and this business isn't gonna make a profit for a year. How is that going to like affect the marriage? How's that gonna affect the kids? How's that gonna affect like the stress? So you have to really figure out like what it is. Is it all of these things? Is it something else? And then you have to ask yourself, how are you, it's quote unquote, they call it maintaining it. So how is the fear kind of manifesting? Are you just running from it? Are you avoiding the final calls with the franchisor because you don't want to make a decision? Um, are you saying, oh, I just need to know a little bit more? And you're asking these questions that don't matter. Um, are you asking, is it 51% or is it 50% cogs? And it's like, dude, that has no bearing whatsoever on whether you're going to move forward with this or not, right? You're getting this is like what's the name of the insurance carrier? Like you start asking questions like that, that you're making up reasons to not make a decision. You know, um, and then lastly, you have to ask yourself: is this an adaptive or a maladaptive fear? So, is this a reaction to a real danger? Holy cow! I just heard in the last call that the franchisors thinking about doubling the royalty. Like, I can't make a decision until I get to the bottom of this. That's a fair fear. If one of the franchisees told you that, that's a fair fear. Or are you overreacting? You heard a franchisee said that a customer called and yelled at them. Of course, a customer called and yelled at them. Like, someone's going to yell at you at some point because they're not happy, and usually has nothing to do with the business. You know, they're just in a bad mood, and you're the one who called them, and so you're the one who they're going to yell at, right? Not a real fear, and you're just using that as an excuse to not make a decision. So, like, those are the things that you have to kind of get answers to before you can start to fix it. Um, Brian, does that sound about right? Am I missing anything there?
No, I agree. Yeah, I'm tracking, man. I think that's interesting.
Okay. And then, so once you know what the fears are and how you're reacting to them or how they're manifesting, there's three types of therapies I'm going to talk about today. The first one's called cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's about identifying thoughts that are like runaway thoughts. The next one will be exposure therapy, which I think everyone's kind of know about, or they can kind of infer what it is. And the last one's acceptance and commitment theory. So cognitive behavioral theory, one of the most scientifically proven methods of overcoming fear, where you target the feedback loop between the thoughts, the emotions, and the behaviors. So to give you an example, first you identify.
For sure.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
So I think how this would apply in franchising would first you identify the false beliefs. I will never sell anything. Not a single person is going to buy my thing, and I'm going to run out of money in 6 months. And then, right, that's the fear. And you're going to test it if it makes sense. Well, this franchise has 150, 200, 500, whatever franchisees who all sold something, and they sell a lot of things. So maybe it doesn't really line up with reality. Maybe I'm going to fail because no one wants to work for me. I need employees, and for some reason, the town that I live in, there's not going to be anybody who wants to do this thing. Same thing, tested against reality. Oh, well, the average number of employees in the franchise system is 10. Doesn't align with reality. My family will hate me and my friends will point and laugh at me for leaving corporate America, right? Um, take whatever it is, take it to its logical conclusion and have conversations with real people, right? Your family loves you, your friends are going to support you. Right? You just have to keep comparing. And that's why the validation that you spoke about earlier, Brian, is so important because that's the reality that people are comparing it to, right? And a lot of times they think that they're in some like special, like for some reason, Denver, Colorado is unique to the rest of the country. Well, you haven't done it in my market. Dude, we've
Yeah,
done it
that you
200
don't know
times.
New Jersey.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah,
know
it's
New
like
Jersey.
it's like, no, it's the same. And so I think that's the thing is like they just have to because it's different if it's not a franchise. If it's this new idea, like those are all fair thoughts. Because there are businesses that people start up every day and nobody ever buys anything from them. But
Mhm.
you have the reality of the hundreds of other franchisees that you got to call up and talk to and they can tell you exactly when they made their first sale, exactly how long it took, how much money they needed to get going. And so like as far as this therapy, like this is something that I think is very helpful for people. Identify all the things, where are your runaway thoughts going, compare it to reality. Um, so I think that's the biggest thing is like we have a reality to compare it to, and that reality is other franchisees, right? Um, okay. Any takeaways or thoughts on that?
No, but that one reigns true with everybody I speak to. Most people don't show it till the end, um, which is normal. So I guess for those listening to this that are using this as an educational tool, um, as you evaluate franchises, it's not that I'm asking you to show me your fears, but the more vulnerable you can be, we can go at it with like Josh is suggesting, we can go at it with like an exercise that makes sense, and or we can't. So I think a lot of folks, as they evaluate franchise, they put on a poker face. They don't want to talk about fear. They don't want to show that they're vulnerable. And we get to the end when it's very important, when they've spent 8, 10, 12 weeks of evaluations and they derail for something that we could probably do a logical exercise, not to sell them, but to help them overcome that and to say, I can believe in this a little bit more, whatever it may be. Like, hey, I need to do a sleeping exercise. Let's double check. So I'm not asking you to show me your poker cards, but oftentimes us development guys are looked at as the sales guys. We're here to help you navigate, reality and unrealistic fears. And there are certain things that we can do and help in certain directions we can point you in. And it's our role to help you identify if this is a good opportunity and if your fears are right and if they're wrong. We're here to help you with that.
Awesome. And I do want to just like quick note, territories are different. So like I'm not saying that
For sure.
you don't have certain things, but there is like mathematical ways. Like I pulled census data, I pulled lists of private schools, preschools, and daycares, like to make sure Denver was good. And then when I spoke to other people, the numbers that I had in my territory were actually better than theirs. So like, I'm not saying that like all territories are the exact same. What I am saying is that like I talked to other people in Denver and I talked to other people in cities like Denver, where again, I was like, well, I'm worried about this, this, and this. And they told me that in cities just like Denver, no issues. In fact, those are some of the best franchisees. So, okay, I do want to put that caveat in there real quick. Okay, next therapy I'm going to talk about is exposure therapy. So this is basically where you have to go near your fear to realize it's not going to kill you. So with I think the closest you can get to it is speaking to a lot of owners. So we've kind of hit that. Listening to podcasts from other owners, and then finding people who just own businesses, and just talking to them and hearing the good and the bad, right? Hearing how they did have challenges, but they overcame them, and here's how they prepared themselves for that challenge. Here's how they made sure that they were able to get overcoming it. So, a lot of people who are in corporate America, they just never hear anyone doing this, and so they think it's like this crazy thing that only like absolute madmen do, where there's like thousands of people that open franchises every year. So it's not that crazy. And so I think the closest you can get to exposure therapy with this is just hearing as many stories and speaking to as many people as possible, who are just like you and realizing that it's not a bunch of, Jeff Bezos's and Sam Altman's, starting Footprints floors or whatever.
Yeah. I think something I would throw at folks though in this exercise is, oftentimes in corporate America, it's a pretty aggressive, competitive landscape, and we don't show our vulnerable aspects or our weaknesses. We don't show them by design. We don't want our competitive, cube mate to steal our job because he recognizes that we're not good at something. And so we don't make ourselves vulnerable. We don't talk about our weaknesses. We don't ask for help, especially men, right? And so as you think about evaluating entrepreneurship, whether that's buying a business, starting something from scratch or starting a franchise, challenge yourself to be vulnerable. Challenge yourself to have these conversations, but understand that if you've got a resource and an entrepreneur that's a friend's neighbor or something like that, understand that the first time you sit down to coffee with that individual, you're not going to have the guts to ask him the level of questions that are really going to move you. And so you might have to have that second cup of coffee with that guy. And you might have to warm him up, and you might have to warm yourself up to get the courage to say, "Hey, I'm afraid of this." Is there any time in your entrepreneur journey that you were afraid of something? And chances are that entrepreneur will say, "Heck yeah," because as entrepreneurs, we can say, "Yeah, I'm scared all the time, but I'm in control of that. And nobody's going to fire me. And I make mistakes every single day. My goal is to do one more thing right than I did wrong each day. Just one, because I do a bunch of things wrong all the time. Um, but if I'm in corporate America, man, I'm not saying I made a mistake. Heck no. My head's on the chopping block. The landscape I work, like, it just doesn't work that way. And so we're hardwired, we're programmed for a long period of time to not be vulnerable. And as an entrepreneur, you've got to open up and you've got to be able to tap into resources. And going back to franchise, I say this, it's kind of cliche, but it's not about your resources. It's about being resourceful. If you can't tap into and leverage those resources, you're not going to benefit from the franchise system. You got to set fear, ego, at the door. You got to be vulnerable and just work with the team that's there to make you better and stronger.
Yeah, great thoughts there, Brian. Um, okay, and then the last therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. Okay, and it's basically what it is. You accept and you commit to keep going forward anyway. So just teaches you to. It's just living with fear, knowing that you're going to you're going to survive, and hoping over time it gets better. I can tell you in business, at least for this type of fear, it does get better. Um, and so a great way of doing it is reminding you of your values. So like a value is something that's true all the time. Like I always want to do right by my customers. I always want to do right by my family. I always want to, make the most profitable decision, whatever it is. And then you take actions that are aligned with those values, even if they're scary. Because if this is my value, it's something that I believe is always right. Otherwise, if it's not something that's always right, it's not a value. It's just a thing that's preferable in most occasions. And so you accept before the fear happens that even if you do feel fear, you're going to keep moving forward aligned with your values. And so if you have these long-term goals that are as important to you as your values, or you value like freedom, or you value owning your own time, then you're going to make a decision that's aligned with that, even when you feel fear. And that decision is going to be owning your own business or doing something different than what you're doing now, where you don't own your time. And so that's kind of where you're making this commitment before it happens that you're going to accept the fear and keep moving forward. Um, I think that's super important, because you are going to feel fear at that point, like we said. And if you're not committed that this is something that you truly value for whatever reason, in whatever way it's valuable to you, um, you won't be able to move forward. But if you commit that you will move forward no matter what that fear is, and that's what's going to get you over that final hump. Brian, thoughts?
Yeah, I think this one's really important as well from my experience related to finding and identifying what those value points are. And as you evaluate a particular business, determining if that business can achieve those value points. So, for example, something I hear a lot is community involvement. That can be a value that someone's looking for. I currently work 15, 17-hour days. I don't get to help. I played collegiate football and I'd love to coach. I don't have kids yet, but I'd like to give back or whatever the case may be. And so as you evaluate a business and you recognize that it can achieve one of those values, that it may not be money. It may not be, a car or whatever. But as you start to see if a business can or cannot achieve those values, it's going to start to enforce whether or not that's the right business for you. So I think, finding those, putting them out there and really putting it, is it of value to me? And then helping use that as these other fears come up as well. So, and I know that's a little bit of a twist on what you're saying, but I definitely think that you have to establish what are the key aspects. Because I share with people all the time, if standing in line at the bank to put money in your account is like the value that gets you excited, man, you're going to have way more days that you're not doing that, or way more time that you're not doing that. So is it, you get to build a team, or you get to, work with your neighbors and beautify their properties, or you love children and you love the fact that every day your team gets to interact with, 550 kids and help them with a skill set, which is confidence. Yeah, we teach dance. No, we teach confidence. We teach joy. We teach free expression, and my team gets to interact with 350 kids every day. So it's like I'm rooted to those values, and those things help me when I'm afraid to go into the next daycare and pitch my services. I got to remember that as I walk in to talk to that director or that owner or whomever, I'm going to look at some of those little kids and remember that's what we're here for. We're here to change their lives. So this adult that I'm afraid to talk to because I'm not an extrovert salesperson or whatever the case may be. So I absolutely think that what you're saying there is relevant, and I see it all the time. And I ask people to make kind of a list of what do you find value out of that maybe today your current career doesn't allow. Is it coaching football? Because you get to pick and choose, and of course you make a sacrifice to work early in the morning, because today you're knocking off, or in the summertime or whatever, you knock off at 3 o'clock to go to that high school because you're coaching the offensive line. And yeah, when you're done with that, maybe you come back and you do some emails, and that's what entrepreneurs do. But we don't miss out on things that are important to us. So yeah, finding those values is very important.
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree. It's part of what I do. Um, as part of my process for matching people to franchises, having them write that stuff out, and then finding some franchises I think can help them achieve that. So, yeah. So I think when you're starting a business, you're starting a franchise, you have to do all these things, right? It's always natural. You're gonna have all these worst case scenarios in your head that you slowly start to realize that they're not gonna happen, right? Then you start doing your financial modeling. You talk to franchisees, and you say, okay, well, you know, um, this is actually how much I need numbers wise. Do you make good decisions around the numbers, not fear based decisions? Um, and so assuming that you've done all this, the modeling, and you've got the runway to get through everything, you realize that the risk now is like execution. Then you start talking about the franchisees, like, oh, I actually will sell things. I actually will be able to hire people. And you are just a normal person running this business. You speak to your spouse, and she's not going to divorce you and take the kids if you don't make $1 million in your first year. You talk to your friends, and they're usually excited for you. Wow, you're starting a business. Like, we've always wanted to leave corporate Americas, but we don't have the ability to get over our fear. So the runaway thoughts start to leave you. Okay. And you start talking again, going back to, you're talking to franchisees, you're listening to podcasts, you're watching YouTube videos, you're hearing the good stories and the bad stories. Um, you listen to how they struggled and got through it. You realize you're not alone, right? Now you're exposed to these things, and the fear is starting to dissipate a little bit. And then you finally accept that nothing is going to make all the fear go away, that it's a big investment. It's a life change. It's new, right? Anytime you're making change like this, not only is the thing new, but you're going to have to become a new person. You're going to become a different person. And so if
Mhm.
you weren't at least a little scared, you'd be foolish. Um, but you know that your values align with moving forward. So you commit to do so, and you work through the fear slowly, day by day. As you close deals, your team grows, your fear stops being, am I going to make money? And your fear is going to be, am I going to grow as big as I want to while still being the person in my family? Now you start balancing the things that you want. And now it's not like I want to be 100 units. Now it's like, what do I really want? Now that I understand, I'm in it, and I really get it. Now you can like fine tune those goals, and really make them what you want to be. And you have control over that, as opposed to your boss having control over that. Um, and then one day, someone's going to ask you how you got over the fear that to start a business. You're so confident now, and you're going to be like, "It's fine, man. Just do it. Just start a business." And that's just like the cycle that people go through. So, just to tie it all up. So I know we're going long here. I'm gonna real quick. I said I was gonna mention stoicism. There's a famous quote thing that they used to say is memento mori, right? Which is remember you're gonna die. And this is something that's helped me overcome all sorts of fears, whether it was in the Marine Corps, whether it was, I had a skydiving license at one point, I've let it lapse. Whether it's doing, a number of kind of crazy things I've done, starting businesses, whatever, moving to new countries, not knowing languages. And it's that like, you're gonna die. And you're gonna die either doing the things that you wanted to do, or you're gonna die doing the things that you didn't wanna do. You're gonna die with regrets, or you're gonna die not with regrets. And it's like, would you rather regret the things that you should have done? Or would you rather regret that you tried something and you weren't as good as it as you were hoping? And I know which one it is for me, and hopefully I live that. And so, people need to think through that as well as like your time on this earth is finite. And so, like, what kind of life do you want to live? And are you going to let fear dominate that? Or are you going to let your fear of dying, not being the person that you wanted to be, dominate your choices? And I think that's a powerful thing that people need to sit with um, when they're making big life choices like this, right? So, yeah, that's kind of the final thing for me. Brian, do you have any last thoughts or input as we sign off here?
Yeah, I mean, I think fear is something we don't like to talk about, but it's important. It's important to be honest about it, and I think you can look at other things you've done in your life that might help you overcome a business decision, such as having children, um, getting married, pledging, and committing to someone else and living with someone else or buying a house, and so fear lives in everything we do. Um, but to your point, Josh, would you rather just never do it because you're afraid of it. And that's for each individual to manage and wrestle with themselves. But I know, and and we're living it. Making and taking that risk is so beneficial and so worth it in so many ways. So yeah, fear, and I say that because if you're listening to this or if you've made it this far, fear's around every corner. It never goes away. You just learn to chuckle about it because you're like, yeah, yeah. And what was once fearful, you wake up a month later or 6 months later and you go, I can't believe that ever got me
Yeah.
stuck. And then it'll be something else, and you continue to advance and go, gosh, I can't believe that. I was worked up about that. But it happens every day.
Awesome. Awesome. Good last words, Brian. I appreciate you. And I hope, people learn something. I'm Josh Emison with Tracer Franchising. If you want help finding great franchises, you can visit me at tracerfranchising.com to schedule some time or email me at josh@tracerfranchising.com. We have tons of free resources if you just want education. And I hope to help you get through your fear and find a great business